Is there any? All right.
Yeah. All right. Welcome to the Call to Duty podcast. I'm here today with you, excited to get this remote podcast with one of our new Cadre members, an awesome brother, Luke Guffey. And so Luke is here. We're going to talk about Luke's life and his background. He is currently a member of the U.S. Army Special Forces, the Green Berets. He's been through Ranger School. He's had a lot of experience in the military. And he's also a relatively recent convert to Catholicism. He's got a great family that he is getting started. And we're just super excited to have him as part of our team. We're going to talk about his life. We're going to talk about the retreat and what he's going to be doing at the retreat. So, Luke, my brother, good to see you. Good to have you. Glad that we're here together.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I've, been really excited for the last few years to try to actually come out to the retreat and to be able to be invited as a Cadre member is a huge honor and a blessing. And I really look forward to it.
Well, I really, every year our retreat keeps getting bigger, and I've already told a couple people, hey, guess what we have this year? We have an actual Green Beret who's an awesome Catholic is coming. So, listen, I've been working your stuff already. But
I use that. That's my everyday motivation for working out. I was like, I got to be in shape.
Yeah. Well, listen, you being you is going to be great. So let's talk a little bit about tell us maybe kind of where you grew up and how you grew up. I know you played some hockey growing up, which just gives you a natural toughness. But tell us a little bit about your time growing up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I come from a military family, huge military background. I don't know if I've ever told you this in private conversation, but our family, my mom is sort of the family historian, and she does a really good job of really tracking down not just, names and, birth dates and when people died and where they're buried, but she's found out, a lot through her research about, where our family has been and what they've done. And, we've had family members participate in every war the United States has participated in, confirmed since the Civil War. There is a chance we've had ancestors fight in the Revolution. That one is a little bit harder to nail down. But, I come from a very long history of military service. My granddad was in the Air Force, fought in Korea and Vietnam. My dad was in the Air Force, fought in most of the little conflicts during the end of the Reagan administration, going into Desert Storm, and then he served all the way until 2015. So he and I had an overlap in service.
Your dad was an Air Force aviator or an Army aviator?
He was an Air Force aviator. So my family is really split, Air Force and Army. Before, obviously, the Army Air Corps is what birthed the Air Force, but my family is really right down the middle in terms of service members in the Air Force and service members in the Army. No Marines or sailors in our family. No, sir.
Yeah, pretty cool. Yeah, that's right. Absolutely not. All right. Well, good stuff. So where'd you grow up again? You grew up on the East Coast, yeah?
Up and down the East Coast. I was originally born at then Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty. Which is so great because, things went full circle, and that was my first duty station was Fort Liberty. I grew up there, the DC area, Northern Virginia. That's where, you talk about hockey. That's where my brother and I both picked up hockey sticks for the first time and played in a burgeoning hockey market where you're right. I mean, that's a tough sport. We learned to play, physical and team centered sports, which, has a lot of lessons that help translate into the military. And then, where else did I live? Oh, and then I went to from the East Coast. I then went to Texas Tech University, kind of a long round of kind of weird way I ended up there. Had to do with my brother playing junior hockey for a team in Texas. That's what got me to come out to Texas. I visited a bunch of schools. One of my best friends ended up going to Texas Tech. He then did their ROTC program and sort of convinced me to go out there as well. It was a great program. I definitely one of my original leaps of faith. I didn't know a thing about West Texas or the Panhandle or Texas Tech, and I just went. Never even visited, just went.
Yeah, sure.
And ended up being an absolutely excellent decision. I love my time there. I
Yeah.
love the people I met there. And there were some moments there at Texas Tech that actually helped prime me for my journey to the Catholic Church. Ultimately, I still keep in touch with my friend who helped run a youth Bible group there, which was really great. He and I, he's a good Christian. He's not in the Catholic Church, but he is someone who I love having discussions with and talking about, Christ and the gospel and everything. So yeah, I'm really glad I went there.
One of the group focus has been a big help in our call to duty retreat, actually. And a shout out to my man, David Wentworth, who is now down in Alabama. But when he was at Georgia Southern, they're doing, I bet Focus is at Texas Tech, but they're doing such a good job of providing this great environment where Catholics are embracing their faith and they're leading Bible studies. And it was really a void. Our other brothers and sisters, Protestant brothers and sisters, were doing it really well, but there was really not much there for these Catholic kids. And that's really been a great benefit. So we're big fans of Focus for just like that, like reaching you when you're in college. And, a big problem is our folks staying Catholic when they go to school. Anyway, Focus is a big part of that. So you had some of that a little bit at Texas Tech. That's where you started ROTC. So after ROTC, graduate as a amazing second lieutenant. And then what's the next step for you?
So I was one of those gung-ho, as obviously with the rest of my story, like I wanted to be infantry more than anything. I wanted the blue cord. I wanted to be Queen of Battle all the way. I wanted to be a knuckle dragger. I wanted all of it. And that's just not what God had in store for me. So I commissioned as a field artillery officer. I remember I was upset, and I love thinking about how upset I was because I was so wrong. I loved my time in the field artillery. I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where I learned to be, everything a field artillery officer needs to be. From there, I had the opportunity to go straight to Ranger School after my basic officer course at Fort Sill, which was hilarious. Because they don't really teach you anything for Ranger School. In fact, I remember one of my favorite sayings where it's a school. They'll teach you what to do there. And I was like, okay.
So
that's not true.
That's not true. I mean, nowadays, of course, it's Ranger prep, all kind of stuff before you go to Ranger School. So did you show up with no real prep? Is that what you're saying?
So it was different kinds of prep. It was, and I'm again eternally thankful for what they did. The prep they did for us was purely physical.
Just smoking.
97% physical. I mean, just day in, day out, just smoke fest. That was the best shape I've ever been in by far. And I was boxing on the side. On my days off, I was going to a boxing gym, and actually learning from a pro boxer, which was getting me in even better shape. I mean, that was just pure smoke fest. Get ready for the physical and mental torture of Ranger School. But in terms of, patrolling tactics and Ranger stakes, which are your events to, weapons assembly or disassembly and assembly, how to employ a Claymore mine, all kinds of these like small things, which I have down now, I did not have down then, was definitely a massive learning curve out, for me, and as well as the other, 16 artillerymen that went to Ranger School with me.
We haven't got the okay to deploy any Claymores yet at the Call of Duty weekend, but I'm glad that you know how to do that. So maybe in the future, I mean, I want to bring a bird in, but again, maybe that's like Call of Duty 10. We'll have some of that. We can fast rope out of a bird or something, right? But anyway.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. All right. So just tell us a little bit about what Ranger School is like. What were some of the hardest things for you?
Right. Absolutely. And also to kind of, to put it into a little bit, again, in the context of sometimes you don't know if when your eyes aren't exactly open yet, you don't know the route that God is having you walk down.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
I know I told you this in the past, but it's worth reiterating. There were times in Ranger School where the chaplain will come out and talk to everyone, and he also gives out bread with
Yeah.
peanut butter slathered all over it, and boy,
Right.
everyone becomes a Christian then.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really it's everyone's got to go see the chaplain, everyone's got to go listen to the gospel and
Yeah.
stuff like that,
Yeah.
just so they can get that peanut butter bread. But there was still a good moment there where I was listening to him, and we were being kind of sustained, not just physically, but I mean, goodness, it was so
super good
sort of
right there.
mentally nurturing to just be in the presence of that. But back to sort of what Ranger School is. I mean, at its core, it is. I mean, it's just physical and mental suffering. Um, it is fasting on steroids. It is pain throughout your whole body. I know Ranger School for some people is easier than others. Some guys like to take the scenic tour, as I did. I recycled a couple of different phases. I was there for 126 days,
Okay.
and no
That doesn't
phone.
sound like you took the easy way. I'm just saying.
No, I will never claim to take. I did not take the easy way.
Yeah.
I took the hard way. I had friends who took the harder way than me.
Wow.
We call them double tabbers, where they did every single phase twice.
Wow.
And it's just, man, there's so many moments that it's you learn to be comfortable in your suffering.
Sure.
You really do. I mean, I can't tell you. I got a lot of lessons that I give to younger men and friends and people like that who sort of ask, they get there's this misconception sometimes that because when you're in the military and you're a Ranger or you're a Green Beret, that you're this physical specimen. And not saying that doesn't exist. There's a lot of guys who are absolute freaks of nature. But what I always tell people is the superpower that some people are born with, some it's cultivated, is that we become very comfortable in our suffering. You have to be able to go to a place that you've got sand that's sort of caked onto your skin from head to toe, and you're wet and you haven't slept and you're walking 12 miles and you've got 100 pounds on your back and your shoulders are screaming at you and your knees hurt, and something happens and you just look over to your buddy and you just laugh. And you're just like, what else? What can I do other than laugh? This is just this is my life. Well, and yeah.
I mean, look, what you're talking about, though, that you have learned in kind of this natural sense is so powerful for men to find in the real life and the spiritual life. Like, most men will never go through suffering like that, but all men are going to go through real suffering. And 100%. You're going to lead PT and you're going to make us suffer a little bit, and that's a big part of we want to experience a little bit of suffering together on the Call of Duty weekend. And the reason is that we men have to talk about suffering, and we have to talk about suffering. How do we handle it? Well, the big thing that we're going to talk about is brotherhood, right? And that's what, I don't want to speak for you, but when you're suffering and you've got those brothers on your right and your left, you guys can laugh 100%. About it and you can suffer together. And when you get isolated, we'll talk about those tactics of the enemy. When you get isolated and you're suffering, it's really, really dangerous and difficult. And so suffering is a normal part of our life. Pope Benedict says we're not made for comfort, we're made for greatness. When I think about you guys, the guys that wear the Ranger tab, the guys that wear the SF tab, these are guys that have come through a lot of suffering and have been successful, and they know how to suffer. So again, excited that you're going to bring that to us, because we all need that training. That's why we do this weekend. We need to introduce this and understand it as a normal part of our life, it's not the exception, it's actually the rule, right?
Well, and that's such an important point. You talked about being there with your brothers. That's too many men and too many people in general get this, I don't know, this misconception also about suffering, which is, if I defeat it, that makes me a better person. And definitely there's cases for people to do that, but
sure.
It's so important. the lesson you learn, it's so important that you got to have that team, those brothers, those people around you. You know, that's one thing my old first sergeant from the last battery I was in the 82nd Airborne, you know, that we love to sort of espouse to the men, which is shared suffering breeds camaraderie. You know, you guys and us going through it with you, you know, the leadership, the men, everyone going through this horrible stuff together is what is going to bring us together, is what's going to make us closer. And it's so true. Like that's one thing I really look forward to, you know, teaching the guys. We're not going to even really be doing anything that's going to, not, so to speak, destroy, you know, guys individually, but it's giving them an opportunity to be able to look over at their buddies and you know, get that opportunity to sort of this stinks, and kind of have that smile and that little laugh, and then you know, 2-3 days from then they're gonna be like, man, you know, you remember when we were doing this? Like it's suffering together is an opportunity, and there's so many lessons in that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think you mentioned this earlier. Like, there's plenty of opportunities in our life. You actually don't have to go look for it, but when you have to just start to learn how to embrace it. You know, I've never been through anything like that Ranger School or anything like that. And jiu-jitsu for me is there's a lot of brotherhood that comes out of just getting smoked on the mats and some guy just choking me with my own belt and destroying me. And you know, it's like that's awesome, dude.
Yep.
And
it is.
It builds that brotherhood, you know, and another good reason to do jiu-jitsu out there. All right. Amen. So you know, you made it through Ranger School. Did you get injured?
Oh yeah. I had a pretty gnarly injury actually that went, I would say, pretty unattended. This is a funny story that spans 2 major events in my life. It spans Ranger School all the way to my deployment to Afghanistan. So there was one patrol we were doing in Ranger School, and I'll never forget all of this. So we're walking in a file, you know, just men in a row walking through, we're sort of weaving through the woods. And I watched 3 guys in front of me slip and fall into a ravine. I then watched 2 guys in front of me slip and fall into a ravine. And the guy in front of me, his name was Matt. And I said, Matt, watch your step. And as I got step, Matt slipped and fell in the ravine. And I kid you not, I started to say to myself, how did you not see? And I slipped and fell in the ravine.
That's funny.
And when I hit I mean, it was pretty deep. I hit the ground. What had happened was, and we know this from what happens later, is I chipped a chunk off my femur, a little disc off my femur about yay round. And that chunk of bone then inserted under my, well, at first it inserted into the joint capsule, and then it stayed there for a year. And then I was, you know, squatting, doing normal exercises. My knee had been killing me forever, but I could still move. I had a couple like locking moments where my knee would lock up. I had no idea what was going on. And then I was squatting one day thinking stupidly, because I was a young 23-year-old at that point. My legs just weak. I need to get stronger. So I'm just going to squat super heavy.
I'm just going to get deeper with this squat. That's what I need. Right.
And it shot that bone fragment through the joint capsule, through my meniscus. So I punctured a hole in my meniscus. Wow. And then I had that bone floating in my leg. I could move it around like under the skin. I was like, oh, it's not good. That then started a whole series of events where I was like going to my doc and I was like,
you get a little knee scope for that? I'm sure they had
I did. Yep. They removed the whole bone, but it was really funny because that knee scope happened after Afghanistan. So I had that free floating piece of bone in my leg for years.
There you go.
And
that felt good patrolling through Afghanishan, right? I hear Afghanistan's pretty flat.
Yeah.
Right. Good for the knees.
Yeah. And it's one of my favorite stories, which was we were on our very first mission in Afghanistan. It was technically our first 2 missions. We did 2 14-day patrols back to back, and with a day period or a day break in between them. And so the anniversary of this event is coming up, and
Mm.
I had been told based on my knee injury that you can't deploy, you're not deploying,
Right.
blah blah blah.
Yeah.
My battalion commander was like, "Phooey to that, Guffey,
Yeah.
get on the plane." I
No
was like,
doubt.
"Yes, sir."
Yeah.
I got on the plane. I was told by my doc that I needed a 2 or maybe even a 3-star waiver, a 3-star general to approve a waiver for me to even deploy. We totally didn't listen to that. I deployed.
Right. Yeah.
We're in a firefight. We're being engaged by the Taliban.
Okay.
And we had set up a fob, a temporary fob. And so we had a sort of a I don't know, it's like almost like a satellite telephone hub that we had brought with us. And our command back in Kandahar called us in the middle of this firefight. And I'll never forget this radar technician, Specialist Bishop, answers the phone. I'm up top on the building. We're trying to get fire coordinates onto a Taliban position as they're shooting at us. And Bishop calls up from down below and he says, "Lieutenant Guffey, TAC South wants to talk to you." And I literally said, "Not now, Bishop.
Yeah.
I'll call him after this." And he said,
You're
"Okay."
right. Kind of busy.
And after it was all said and done, he goes, I said, "Oh, Bishop," I said, what was TAC South calling about?" And he said, "Oh, they called to say your waiver to deploy got denied."
You can't make this up. I mean, this is like Army. This is
pure
like
Army
101.
Pure Army. I was like, "Oh, that's hilarious. I was just in a
love
firefight and my waiver to deploy just got denied."
Roger that. Yeah. Oh, it's so good.
It's one of my favorite Army moments. Yeah.
All right. So Ranger School, then 82nd, and some deployments. At what time, I think we've talked before. Were you always thinking about, hey, I want this next step to be Army SF, Green Beret? Right. How did that go?
It's a funny story. My dad deployed a ton. My dad deployed to Afghanistan, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Like I've only deployed 3 or 4 times. 1 to Afghanistan, and then 3 to Central and South America. My dad deployed literally 12, 13 times, mostly to the Middle East, and he did he was part of an air wing that worked a lot with special forces and the special operations community. And so he worked a lot with Green Berets. And then when we were stationed, when I was a kid, when we were stationed at Fort Bragg, all of our neighbors were Green Berets and special forces guys. Mm-hmm. And so we've always been around them, and they were always really cool guys. And my dad, when he came back from one of his trips, it was probably it was when I was in high school, probably in like 2008, 2009. He just came back and he just handed me a book, and it was called Masters of Chaos by Linda Robinson. And it's just a cover of 2 guys, and they are wearing, sleeveless shirts, and they're jacked, and they got big beards and Oakleys and backwards hats. And I just looked at that and I was like, I want to do that. And didn't even read the book. I was just like, I just saw the cover and I was like, I just want to do that.
Well, and, you're gonna talk about your rule of cool in a little bit later, but right? You're like, good. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And so I then began my journey. Yeah, and that's what led me. That's why I wanted to go infantry. That's why I wanted to go to Ranger School. That's why I wanted to go to the 82nd Airborne, because a lot of those feed into being a Green Beret. Now, being field artillery was, I still think, a benefit to me. Being a fire support officer attached to the infantry, letting me see the battle space in a much sort of bigger aperture, and understanding how to control assets, I think was better for me to be an SF officer.
God knows how to set these things up. I got the opportunity to meet and become friends with a Green Beret legend. Colonel Ken Facey was his name. He's now in Arlington, and I was active duty physical therapist here in Augusta, and he lived in Augusta here, and he had a shoulder replacement. So I see this patient. At the time, he was about 80, and he's a colonel, and so I bring him back. I think I'm a young captain, and I said, "Hey, sir, tell me what you did." And he said, "Oh, like all of you guys, he was very humble." And he said, "Oh, I was in the Green Berets." And I said, my favorite movie growing up, and back in the day, they would like play it like once every year. They would play the Green Berets, John Wayne, right?
Yep.
So every year that would come on, they would like gather the boys and we would watch it. And I just loved that movie, and so he said, "Yeah, I was in that movie." I said, "What?" He said, John Wayne played me. I was like,
Oh my gosh.
no kidding, right? So I said, "Time out, sir. We got to talk about this," right? So
Oh yeah.
yeah, so you will see Colonel Ken Facey. You need, I'm sure you have the movie.
I'm gonna go yep.
So he is the briefing officer. In about the first 10, 15 minutes, he's got a,
I know exactly what you're talking about.
right. He's in his tan kind of uniform, and he's giving a briefing. So Colonel Ken Facey was an interesting, like, he was in a helicopter at this battle, at this base camp where the SF team came under fire, right? That's kind of the main scene of that end of that movie, is that firefight. And he said that he was in a bird flying around, kind of command and control type of thing, right? Because he's a 05, he's a lieutenant colonel. Right. And so he's not down there pulling the trigger type of thing. Well, so he said, I'm in my, he was at Fort Benning at the time, gets a call. A sergeant major says, "Hey, sir, John Wayne's on the phone for you." And he said, "Okay," picked up the phone, and John Wayne says, "Colonel Facey, this is the Duke. And we need to have lunch." So he has lunch with John Wayne, and John Wayne wanted to kind of hear the story of the battle, right? So Colonel Facey tells him, "Well, I'm flying around and we're doing some command and control." And he said, "Well, I got to get in the fight." And Colonel Facey said, "Well, colonels don't really get in the fight." And it was a great line. He said, "Yeah, but I'm John Wayne." So the movie
in the fight.
John Wayne's going to get in the fight. So the helicopter crashes, and I guess that's how John Wayne gets it. That's kind of how they rigged it up. But Colonel Ken Facey was, I got to spend about a year and a half with this guy, and we became friends. After his rehab, we would have lunch together at Cracker Barrel. He liked to go to Cracker Barrel, and so I would meet him at Cracker Barrel and just listen to his stories. It was pretty awesome. He would call me Dai Wee. He would call me Dai Wee, which is the Vietnamese for captain. And I just remember in that movie, the little Vietnamese boy was always saying Dai Wee, and anyway.
Yep.
So, Colonel Ken Facey, may he rest in peace. What a warrior. And he was something else, man. So
that's incredible.
Anyway. Yeah, it's pretty cool. All right. So let's talk about you getting into the Green Berets and what's that look like. And because now we're going to start to talk about, that's where you start to experience, maybe guys are witnessing to you, and you're going to start to kind of walk a little bit more towards thinking about joining the Catholic Church. So take us from there.
Well, yeah. So exiting, still in my, formative years of my 20s and sort of exiting a lot of these very formative moments, Ranger School, Afghanistan, and then honestly, just sort of the rigors of being that 25, 26-year-old, figuring out what the heck you're going to do with your life, man. And what that looked like was, a lot of, just like sort of frustration and directionless and aimlessness and all this other stuff. And
is there any faith on your radar going through that stuff at this time?
It's like there, but I'm just, I was too dumb to realize it. That's for a lot of my mid-20s. And then, going into, and then successfully passing Special Forces selection and or being selected, and then starting the Q course. And, I know I've made this joke to you before, but it's worth mentioning again. There's in Ranger School, there's Winter Rangers and Summer Rangers, and the Winter Rangers look down on the Summer Rangers. Now, I got a little bit of Winter. I was there so long. I got a little bit of Winter Ranger, but I was mainly Summer Ranger. So I graduated in August. In fact, my tabversary is coming up August 26th. But God had a way of evening things out for me and made me a Winter Green Beret. So I went through the absolute worst it's essentially the Green Beret equivalent of Ranger School, it's called Small Unit Tactics, and then you go from Small Unit Tactics right into the final exercise, which is called Robin Sage.
Right.
And I did all of that in the dead of winter. It stunk, and that's where you take sort of this getting kind of battered and bruised throughout the years, being frustrated with life, and
Yeah.
then you put that all in a pot, and then throw all of that into the freezing cold rain and winter in
Right.
North Carolina, while you're also again just patrolling the woods and
Right.
really sort of trying to just get through the suffering.
Right.
And it pushed me to a point where I'm 100% convinced that's when the Holy Spirit had some people in my life really sort of demonstrate their witness to me, and it's what really set me on the right course, sort of
Yeah.
exiting the Q course. So a good friend of mine, I was in the middle of winter, middle of just down in the dumps. And what it started, it was a guy on my team. He's a Polish Catholic guy, and he just it started with him telling stories about the Crusaders, and then from there it went to stories about the great Catholic popes and saints of the faith and the great heroes of the faith. And as a young man, learning to be a warrior myself and hearing these epic stories of men who had it way worse than me, and they all were tethered, or rather they were kept afloat by the same common denominator, which was their faith and strength, that the
Right.
strength that the
Right.
Lord gave them. And it was eye-opening to me, and it was something I definitely needed at the time. It lit a fire under my ass, like
Yeah.
I never thought it would.
Yeah.
And yes, that was where I was really started to be exposed to the Catholic faith.
Yeah.
And I remember asking my Polish Catholic brother, and I said, how do I didn't even know. I was raised Methodist. I was like, how do I join the Catholic Church? I said, do I just go and I'm a Catholic? And he's
Right.
like, no. He's like, you got to go to RCIA.
We
I
got
said,
to train
awesome.
you.
I was like,
We got to put you through a little Catholic Ranger school first, right?
100%. And
Yeah. Yeah.
which made sense to me. And actually, it's something I look back on. I know people have differing opinions on a lot of things, but it's actually something I look back on very fondly. And
Yeah.
it's also worth mentioning, I got to see my RCIA instructor, Father Matt, yesterday, and I gave him a big hug, and I told
Yeah.
him I loved him, and I was like, I'm forever in your debt. You really helped form a excellent faith in me, and it was really great. And so I look back on my time in RCIA very fondly. And if it weren't for my my time in Ranger School, sitting in the absolute cold misery, I don't know if I ever would have been able to go.
Right. That's awesome. So when RCIA for you, and when did you come into the church? Easter of how long ago? About 3 or 4 years ago? 3 years ago or so?
Easter of 2021. So I
Yeah.
started my RCIA.
Yeah.
I have a pretty funny RCIA story. I'm sure a lot of people do. I
Yeah.
started my RCIA. So first of all, worth mentioning, as I'm going through Small Unit Tactics and Robin Sage, that's when COVID starts.
Yes.
All
Yes.
throughout the world, and
Yes.
they were off the grid, so we don't even know that it's happening.
Right.
And then so when we emerge out of the final training, and we finished all of our training to become Green Berets, that's when we go right into this lockdown. I mean, they literally told us, we don't even know where to send you guys right now. Just go home, and we'll call you when you need to come into work.
Yeah, and there's no toilet paper.
And there's no toilet paper. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a kick in the nuts, where we're like, as we're coming back, they're like, hey, make sure you get all the toilet paper you can from the camp. And because there's none on the economy right now. And I remember I raised my hand and said, what does this do to you? Does it give you diarrhea? Like what?
Yeah.
And they're like, we don't know. It just get toilet paper. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Well, we talked about this last time, but it was I was on a rich training weekend with the reserves that same weekend, and that's the weekend. So there you are. I like to think about it. It's interesting, God's economy, and what God's doing in other guys' lives, right? Because you're kind of learning and getting ready to come into the church about that time, and at that same weekend, I'm down in Florida on a training weekend. and the call to duty weekend is coming to my mind, and I'm starting to write down, I need to get these men involved and things like that. So God was preparing you even to be a Cadre member back then. I think that's great.
He was looking right at you in Georgia, and he was looking right at me in North Carolina, and he's like, "You two shall meet." Literally.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so RCIA, and let's talk about this beautiful wife of yours a little bit, right? Because where would we be without these amazing Catholic women in our lives? Right. You and I are both so blessed with the women in our lives. And, you know, God's hand was with that connection for you as well. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Right. And, you know, you talk about some of those moments. I think everyone at some point in their life will always, as long as they're willing to listen, will have that moment where God, I mean, truly speaks right to them.
Right.
For me, it was, like I said, you know, I'm now starting to open my heart and open my mind to the Lord. And as I'm emerging from all of this, that's literally, you know, like I said, before all that, you know, kind of trying to figure out what the heck am I doing in my life. I'm trying to find a woman. It's really unsuccessful. It's all very shallow, and nothing's working out. And then I was on a dating app, and I remember as I emerged from, the qualification course, and I'm starting to trying to date during COVID, which was weird in of itself. I remember thinking, okay, I was like, all right, I'm telling myself, you know, the last few months, I was like, I'm telling myself I'm being more serious about my faith, and I want to be more faithful to God. Well, then what better opportunity than right now than to put my faith, literally, like, this is what I did. And so there's a little setting on there on the app I was using, which was, you know, religious preference, and is it a deal breaker if they are not religious? And before I had come to this, I had my, you know, my actual come to Jesus moment. It wasn't a deal breaker for me. And then afterwards I said, you know what, it is a deal breaker for me. I was like, I need to be with a woman who's going to walk with God and me and help me. And I kid you not, I changed the preference, and the first person that comes into my aperture is my now wife, the now mother of our child. And it was like I met. First of all, I saw the picture of her. I was like, oh my gosh, like she's gorgeous, you know, which doesn't hurt.
Yeah, I remember telling my son Thomas, you know, who's married to a beautiful, beautiful Catholic woman, and it's funny, like we think like, for the guys, like, are all the beautiful women kind of not religious? Like, what a lie, you know? Like, there are tons of beautiful women that have even more beautiful spirits. Like, 100%. We're just not asking for it. We're not seeking that out, right? When you start seeking that out, God's like, yeah, well, check this out. And you're like, oh my gosh, right? This is unbelievable. Yeah.
100%. Couldn't agree more. And so that was one of those moments where, I mean, not only did I was like, you know, the younger generation will know this is, I swiped right on her, and I was like, please match with her. Like, please match with her.
Yeah.
And then we did. And, you know, like I said, I had, you know, so many pointless and stupid first dates with women, and who weren't, you know, in the right, you know, frame of mind. And it was to a point where I wouldn't even call home about any of them. My mom would always be like, oh, are you seeing anyone? I'm like, no. And then for the first time in years, you know, I ended up going on my first date with my wife, and I called my mom after, and I said, I just had the best. I said, I want you to know, I just had the best first date of my life.
That's awesome.
It was really funny because I had just started the process for RCIA.
Right.
I meet her, you know, that's one of the first things out of her mouth. You know, she's like, I'm very Catholic and all this. And then as sort of things are getting more serious in the next couple of dates, because I knew day 10, I was like, I'm going to marry this woman. I'm telling you, awesome. I knew. Yeah. And I remember it somehow got brought up in conversation, and I'd be lying if I told you how early the conversation came up, but it was pretty early, because she said, because I hadn't told her yet, but she said,
she's not messing around. You know,
Right. She
you're
said,
not, you're not messing around.
if you're serious about this, you need to go
Yeah.
to RCIA. You need to be Catholic. And I said, well,
Right.
good for you to know. I've been participating in RCIA for a couple of weeks now, and so I'm already on the
No,
train. And she said that's perfect. And so,
man. I
and
mean,
then I went
I
through the
think-
whole process, and I joined the
yeah,
church
yeah,
that the following Easter, and then we were
yeah,
married a couple months after that.
yeah. That's so awesome. Again, just for guys to hear, like, look, stop trying to plan it out yourself.
Right.
Like this doesn't work. We all
Right.
do it, and we all need to be reminded, myself included. I had spiritual direction this morning before we started the podcast, and was reminded again on,
Right.
like, we need to be putting our trust in God the Father and the power of the Holy Spirit and
Yes.
Jesus, our brother, walking with us, and, like, quit trying to make up your own plans. Like, tap into that source and then watch
Right.
what happens. So
Yeah.
it's incredible how God works all that stuff out. And again, he's such a good God, as evidenced by these amazing women that we have, these amazing mothers. You have a beautiful baby daughter, which is, again, I would tell, and this is, you really even become more of a man when you become a father.
Right.
And so that's a beautiful thing.
Right. And I thank God every single day for what he's given me. It was, like I said, it was one of those moments where, I remember saying to myself, as soon as she came into my life, I said, okay, like it was as if he was saying, oh, you're serious about this? Show me you're serious.
Yeah.
And it's just my life has increased tenfold,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I thank him every day for it. And
Yeah.
it's been such a blessing.
Yeah. That's awesome. All right, so let's talk a little bit about. We talked a little bit about PT. We're going to lead some PT, and we're going to suffer a little bit together. I don't want
Yep.
to scare people off. Don't worry. But getting a little bit of physical uncomfortable is why PT's there. We're there to get a little bit uncomfortable with each other as brothers. But I'd like to talk a little bit more about the training scenario that you're going to lead. This is something we do at every call to duty, and it's called close quarter battle, CQB. It is room clearing and things like this. You've done it actually in the military. You've been trained to do it
Right.
with the military, with the highest level of units. It's a great exercise. I want to talk a little bit, like, why would we do CQB? Now, again, it's a military themed weekend. We're using these metaphors to teach these great spiritual ideas. But, why do you think that CQB on this retreat weekend is good for these men? And what does it teach us?
Right. The cool thing about my journey in the military is everything from, when I was a cadet, I got the opportunity to do my sort of like cadet internship also with the 82nd. And that was one of my first, great inoculations to CQB. I did training with Alpha Company, 2 Panther Battalion, and then everything from that to Ranger School to then being in the 82nd to then, going Special Forces, doing a lot of team related CQB. And then not only that, but then continuing my journey in Special Forces, doing, sort of to put it in, I guess, civilian terms, sort of like a plainclothes unit.
Right.
Like the police have a plainclothes unit where you're doing one man CQB.
Yeah.
And I've
Yeah.
gotten this wide of experience of doing everything from, literally 2, 3, 4, 5, 10-man CQB, 12-man CQB, all the way down to one-man CQB. And so I really have a lot of different
Yeah.
experience in how it all affects you. And so the
And I
reason
want
why
that
CQB,
training. I want that training from you offline, by the way, too, by the way. I mean,
oh
you're
yeah,
going to get here early for the retreat, and you and I are going to get some reps. I'm just telling you, right? Because I love it. I want some. So you've done a lot of
it's
it.
good.
So, why would we do it on this retreat weekend with these guys? And what does it have to do with the spiritual life? And what's it have to do with following Christ, etc.?
I'll start with the single man CQB. And it's funny, see guys, when you're by yourself and you're moving through a house and and all this other stuff, and it's very Jason Bourne. It's very sexy, and it is in a sense kind of rule of cool. You know, it is kind of when you do it, when you succeed, you're like, oh, that was the coolest thing I've ever done. but huge but. One, it's terrifying, and two, you're probably in real life like that's not a situation you want to be in at all. I mean, it's literally like we do that training because this is how you might survive. Not, and it's like, but chances are you're gonna die. You're all alone, and and the odds are stacked against you, and it's not easy. And
this is such a huge point. Like, this is the worst case scenario. Like,
you don't want to be alone.
That's right. We would much rather have a couple brothers, and then you're going to, guess what? Be probably very successful, right? Exactly. You have a high chance of success with brothers, right?
And so that in comparison of doing CQB with your team, I mean, there's a saying across the Army when it comes to combat, doesn't matter if it's conventional or special forces, which is we don't want to fight fair. We want to outnumber the enemy, 3-1, 4-1. We are not going to fight fair. Because we're going to freaking win.
Right.
And so you want to show up with your brothers. You want to be there with your brothers. And so when you're doing CQB with your brothers, it's the exact same thing of when you're going into spiritual warfare with the devil. You want to show up with your brothers. You got to have them with you. Their hands got to be on your shoulder, or your hands got to be on the guy's shoulder in front of you, the number one man, because you need each other. And so there's so many parallels of CQB when it comes to working with a team, of being there with your brother, of covering each other's blind spots, of being accountable, of not only staying in your lane, but then knowing your brother's lane, because if he's not able to do it, you got to be able to step up and do it for him.
That's right.
There's so many parallels. There's so many lessons.
I love that. Like if you and I are going into a difficult space, a room, a house, and you're going to turn left, I'm going to turn right, right? The one man, it goes where he goes, and the two man goes opposite. And why is that?
Right.
Well, I'm going to put my plate, I'm going to put my body armor to protect your back,
Right.
And I mean, I just love that. And as I was talking about, no, for sure. Yeah. And as I was, we were talking in last podcast with Pat and Mike and Chad, like there's a lot of situations that I wouldn't want to go in, and I wouldn't by myself. But if Pat or if Chad or if Mike says, hey, we've got to do this difficult thing, the answer is yes. I'm going. I'm in there. And then what do I got to do? I gotta do my job, and I have to, have the back of my brother. I mean, let's just meditate on this for a while. And the other big thing is, hey, if you're out there doing one-man CQB, you need to find some brothers. You need to get a squad together, because you might be successful once or twice, but the spiritual battle is happening all the time, and you need some brothers to get a little bit more successful here, right?
And that's what it's all about. Like, it's funny. There's so many times I was doing single man, and I was watching other of my colleagues do single man. And, it was a good buddy of mine, Ted, he went in, and I felt so bad for him. Thank God we're wearing, face protection and things like that. And it's all simunitions, but Ted walked in there twice, and he walked out, and he had a paint mark square right here.
Wow.
And you joke about it, but you're like, dang, Ted, if this was real, you'd be dead.
No doubt. Right. Yeah.
But then you kind of think about it, you're like, oh man, if this was real, Ted would be dead.
Right.
And it sucks. You don't like that. And then when you do it with your team, one thing that I remember one of the most successful teams I went through it with was in the 82nd. And we had this excellent sergeant, sort of think of him as, a Call of Duty Cadre member, sort of on that. And he had me and a couple other guys that he was helping direct. And, he, if it weren't for him, but then at the same time, I remember we're like, all right, he's kind of giving us instructions, and then it's like, all right, we got to cross the road. As we cross the road, Guff, you're locked down on the door. Second man, you're on the windows to the right. Third man, you're on the windows left. Fourth man, you're on the corners of the building. If anyone comes up behind, he's like, I got our six. And as we're crossing, it's funny, as we're crossing, one guy popped in the door, one guy popped in the window, and one guy came running across the street, and all 5 of us took him out. And I was just like, dude, it's something those were my brothers, and we all had each other covered, and that's exactly what Call of Duty is supposed to be for these young men, is teaching them to keep each other covered.
Yeah, for sure. Last year, I loved watching the patrolling we were doing, because what we were teaching is we had one enemy, and we had 6 or 8 or 10 guys in a squad on a patrol. And what happens when this point guy sees the enemy and kind of calls it out, and all these guys kind of get online and start to put fire on the enemy, and the enemy kind of runs off, and these guys all chase them down and eliminate them. And I was just like, man, if we had dudes working like this together, like, that's some powerful stuff. That's some powerful stuff, right? I mean, we don't, as you mentioned, well, the devil doesn't fight fair, right? For sure. Nope. And so, man, I want to outnumber as best I can. And oh, by the way, I'm bringing Our Lady, and I'm bringing the little flower. Like, I've just been, Saint Therese recently really been fostering this devotion to her. And, my call to duty message to people is to study the life of the little flower. You know what I mean? Like be devoted to Our Lady, like there's also some serious firepower that we're going to bring to bear through that relationship with the saints that I think is pretty awesome.
100%. Yeah. Speaking of, my wife and I were just reading about St. Barbara, the patron saint of the field artillery, yesterday. Yeah. You should read up on her too.
Yeah, nice. I'll for sure, man. I'll check that out. That's awesome. All right, my brother. Well, let's bring this thing down to a land again. You're an answer of prayer for me, because when I started this, I'm a medical officer, right? I'm in the rear with the gear, and I had a sense that we need to kind of get this. We need to get this weekend going. We need to challenge men like this. And, and I prayed early for, like I had a vision of, man, we're going to get some real warriors to show up and train with us. And it's like there are real warriors that are fully Catholic, and they're out there. And so here you are, super psyched about it. Can't wait for the retreat. Men, September 27th through 29. Get on the website, www.call2duty.net. Get on the website, find a registration page. It talks about what you need to bring, all that kind of stuff. It's a small fee to be at the retreat. Don't let that stop you. We'll figure it out. But get to the website, get signed up. This retreat's getting better every year. Our bishop will be there again this year, starting off the retreat. And we're just super excited. We're going to have our first Green Beret teaching and training and suffering with us. Can't wait, brother. It's going to be awesome.
Sounds great. Can't wait to be there.
All right, brother. I'll talk to you soon.
Yes, sir. I will see you then.